morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today on cohort analysis, getting the most out of your data. Just a little bit of a rundown for today. First off, we will be recording this webinar, so just for your information there. We will be answering all the questions at the end. There's a Q&A box that should already be open on your webinar portal, but if not, there is a menu at the bottom that has a Q&A button that should pop that open for you, and after that, just send in questions as you have them. Class, we will be doing a live Looker demo at the end for anybody who wants to check it out, so just keep that in mind. All righty. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our two presenters today. First, I am joined by Josh Moskowitz, the Customer Engagement Analyst Manager here at Looker, and also by Will Wolfson, the Head of Data Quality at Avant. Alrighty, with that said, I'm going to pass it off to Josh.
Thanks, Elena. Hope everyone's doing great out there today before the holidays. As Elena said, we're going to be doing a cohort webinar today. So just kind of having a general discussion around what cohort analysis is and why it matters to most businesses, as well as then an introduction kind of to the way that Avant is doing marketing acquisition analysis using Cohort, as well as fraud detection with Cohorts. And there'll be a little brief segue on kind of the nature of the current landscape in relation to data and why we think cohort analysis is becoming more and more relevant and why Looker is well suited for that. So just to begin, again, we're going to talk about what cohort analysis is. And it really comes down to three main components. First, cohort analysis is when you group subjects. These subjects could be your users. They could be, anything that you're tracking and you're interested in the behavior of over time. And within those subjects, you're grouping them based on a commonality. So they share something, they have something in common, a particular facet, whether it be the month that maybe they joined your website. It could also be maybe it's the state that they're from. The key thing in this case is that when you're doing your cohort analysis, that the groups and the subjects themselves, they stay within their particular group throughout the course of the analysis. So that if they share a certain commonality, they don't change groups over time. That group stays the same. And then finally, you observe their behavior over time. So there's some key performance indicator. There's something that you're tracking that they're doing, in a time series based way. So that's whether it's the spend or the average order value on your website. Could be kind of the progression, maybe through levels of a game. It could be their social interaction or their engagement with your platform. But it's just something that they're doing that you're tracking amongst these groups that share, again, these commonalities. And then you might ask yourself, well, why cohort? Why is it important that we separate our users into these specific groups? Why do we make sure that they share this commonality, and why do we track this behavior over time? And really, the reason we do this, it comes down to the ability to kind of to compare these populations in an apples-to-apples way, and in most cases at statistical significance. So being able to apply some data science to these groups and the KPIs and the behavior of these groups over time. And once you've done this, there's really kind of a lot of applicable business objectives that you can apply this towards. So, at Looker, we're working with a variety of different customers. They all have different data sets. They all have different business models. These business models are evolving. These data sets are evolving over time, but they can apply this methodology of cohort analysis to whether it's customer spend and revenue. So do certain products that are placed somewhere on a website perform better than others amongst cohorts? Do we recommend better products to certain types of cohorts, depending on, again, their demographics or maybe what they've purchased in the past? Are there certain poison products? So do we place certain products that just don't perform as well amongst certain cohorts? We talk a lot about design and optimization. So we have some customers that are looking at their websites and testing different user registration flows, going through different A/B testing of certain designs, looking for kind of the optimal flow or the optimal conversion rates of their users. looking at how they're checking out of their carts. So are they purchasing? Is that flow optimized? Are there issues among certain versions or certain iOS devices, or is the web experience much better than the mobile? Iterating on funnels too, we see that a lot. We actually partner with a company called Segment, and they capture a lot of funnel-based data, and then Looker provides kind of a custom funnel that you can then build and iterate upon. Looker is a SaaS company, and we talk a lot about engagement and retention. There's a lot of use cases here internally that we use to make sure that our users are utilizing the software. Are there certain sets of features that are working better than others? We also work with gaming companies too, so we see a lot of gaming companies kind of iterating on the retention of their users and how do they create a compelling and engaging game for them that they continue to come back and play over and over again. As well as just social network and application activity. So are people engaging with the platform you're providing them? Are they engaging with the other users on that platform? And what are some indicators of those that do or do not? We even see this applied to sales and marketing, and we're going to hear more on that today. So obviously, I won't go into too much detail, but source attribution modeling. So looking at the first source of our users, and do some of those perform better? Do they spend more? Do they convert better? Lead scoring. So of the different lead sources that you have, where are the best ones coming from? How can we predict who's going to perform the best as they're entering into the system? And there's actually one kind of onto the last group here. I have cool custom look-ML metrics, and what I really mean by that is customers that are using cohort analysis, but really kind of defining something that doesn't quite fit into the realm of standard analytics. And the example that I'm actually going to cover today is related to Venmo, but we see what's called a chargeback measure that they created using look-ML. This is our modeling layer. As well as Upworthy's attention minutes metric. So they actually wanted to find a new way to think about engagement of their platform in relation to the content they're creating. And then even here at Looker, we've created kind of customer health tiers. And so we can look at, for groups of customers based on their health or maybe based on some other cohorts, how that behaves over time. But I wanted to touch on the Venmo chargeback measure. And just a note for those that get this slide deck after we're finished the webinar, each of these blue links are clickable, and they will lead to either specific Looker blocks on how you can implement these look-ML modules on your data sets, or they link to, in these two cases here, blog posts that describe the methodology in detail. But what do I mean by cool custom look-ML metrics? Well, kind of, my favorite example is Venmo's chargeback metric. And so at some point, probably about a year ago, I think, maybe a little bit longer, we had an event in New York City, and we asked some of our customers to speak. And one of those was Venmo. And they had a really great use case on why Looker was able to solve a problem for them, and specifically related to the cohorts of their users. And what they saw was that there was a design that they released. And basically, after they released this design, what they noticed was a lot of bad experiences in their user base. So they did some initial investigation, and what it looked like was a lot of the users were inadvertently charging, or actually, no, sorry, they were sending money when they should have been charging the users. And so this led to a lot of basically duplicate requests, a lot of frustration. As you see here, all caps, final AC payment. Not even sure if this is worth it at this point. So, at the end of the day, when you're providing a service or a product for users, you want them to have great experiences. So the Venmo team got together and they said, well, we want to be able to first quantify this. We need to understand how bad this is impacting the business, how bad this is impacting our design, and is there a better design? And what they did in Looker was they already had this entire model built that let them easily cohort their users and slice and dice by all the existing dimensions in their database and any new ones they could think of, but they didn't have this chargeback metric. And so what their team did was basically describe in SQL when a user did a pay charge mix-up. And that was just kind of some crafty SQL around looking for repeat transactions in the same amount in a short window of time, so kind of creating a tiny little session and looking for repeat behavior. And once they had that dimension described in Looker, it was very simple to then kind of see exactly how the design influenced that metric over time. So here at the bottom, you're looking at your paid charge mistakes over time. So if we kind of tie this back to cohorting, the pay charge measure, that's the cool custom KPI. That's what they created to track very uniquely, kind of given the business problem that they were facing in an agile method. And then once they had that in place, you could see here, how that was increased at the design phase and when that went into play, when these mistakes started to happen. And then once they released a new version, they were able to then kind of slice and dice by that version and kind of see that metric decline over time. And so, again, that kind of captures the idea of a cohort analysis in relation to different versions and looking for kind of the optimal design, given that, this new metric, this new KPI, they didn't even know they really wanted to care about until they saw this problem, this chargeback metric, and how they can now minimize that. So a very specific example of, kind of on-the-fly agile analysis using cohorting. Now, before we go into deeper into the kind of Avant use cases, first I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the changing landscape and why us at Looker and some of the customers that we're working with think this is really important, why we need the ability to kind of slice and dice our user base based on many different facets in a very agile method and kind of continue to refine and iterate on this process and look for new KPIs and new things to measure and find that optimal business. So there's a few things that are happening in the industry. One, it's probably quite obvious for those of you that are in the webinar, we're swimming in data. We're talking a lot about data all the time. And this is because of the fact that everyone is, engaging with technology, right? And this technology comes with the ability to very easily track different data about people. We also have social profiles now. So when you're logging into a certain site, some of that data comes through, that metadata on who you are and where you're from. And then you have the behavior that you're transacting on these applications. So that's all getting tracked, and we're just having more and more data, than ever before. And obviously that's not going away. Additionally, what we're seeing is that databases are becoming more powerful. So as the technology evolves, as the data increases, these technologies are also evolving and coming to surface that are meant to basically allow for the exploration of these massive data sets. The database companies like Amazon releasing Redshift. We see Spark now coming out on Hadoop. Google has their BigQuery engine. So we see a lot of these databases kind of purpose-built to handle this overflow of data, this immense amount of data, in a way that lets us explore them in a relatively performant manner. And then finally, aggregating and moving data is getting easier. So we see a lot of ETL partners starting to emerge. We see different APIs opening up and even webhooks and things that you can place onto your website that make it easy to aggregate and move your data into a centralized warehouse. So putting it into a data store that then can kind of provide the one source of truth, or the data lake, or whatever term that people are using to basically just describe all the data that they're putting in place on their users and the transactions and the things that they're doing. So we've got this idea of, again, all this data that we're putting into these warehouses that are purpose-built and powerful for data exploration, and we're combining all these different data sources from different areas like Salesforce, Marketo, whatever it is that you're using that contains information on your user base. And this trend really puts tools like Looker in a very interesting position to kind of solve this use case, give people the ability to start to explore these data sets, to do this on-the-fly cohorting, the slicing and dicing of their data. And the reason for that is it comes down to kind of our architecture. And I think Will will touch on this more as he kind of goes through his use cases and how it ties back to our architecture. But it comes down to three things that we talk about a lot. And that's connect, describe, and explore. So it all starts with this database connection. As I mentioned, we have these more performant databases, again, like Redshift. We have these SQL on Hadoop technologies like Spark and Presto. And Looker connects directly to that data source. So this is a little bit different than kind of conventional business intelligence or some of the more legacy systems like Business Objects and Cognos that were kind of purpose-built for dealing with cubes or summarized pieces of data. We don't want to have to make that limitation. So we think that if you're combining and taking all these rich data sources and putting them into a data warehouse that's performant, why not connect your BI tool directly to that and have access to the entire data set, the row level of detail, without having to summarize and lose visibility, lose those important facets, the commonalities in your cohorts. So we don't do that with Looker. We connect directly to it. And then I touched on this before. I kind of used the term, cool lookml metrics, but Looker comes with a data modeling language called lookml. What this allows you to do, it basically allows you to curate that data in your database. It allows you to clean it up in a sense. It allows you to describe new, again, dimensions or new facets or new ways to slice and dice your cohorts. So whether it's if someone did a chargeback, as we saw with Venmo, or the concept of an attention minute, or again, at Looker, it's customer health. So breaking out all of the different features in the Looker platform and kind of aggregating a user's engagement with that and coming up with a holistic health score. LookML provides this very flexible, agile environment to develop that business model, to let you react to the different questions that your business has, and kind of curate that and evolve that model in tandem with your business as it's evolving. And we've seen that kind of be the case here internally at Looker, and we've seen that be the case at companies like Avant and others that are growing very quickly and need a platform and a business intelligence tool that will evolve as rapid and as quickly as they're evolving. And then finally, the interface itself and the whole concept of exploring this data model, exploring this direct connection to your database. And that's the Looker application itself. So it's a web server application. This means that people are interacting with it just like they would a website. And we give a lot of different variety of ways that you can get that data and these visualizations into different systems, whether we're talking kind of more of an OEM or embed model. So taking these visualizations, these reports, these dashboards, and kind of embedding them in iframes. Again, being web focused makes it very simple to do those embeddings. You can kind of build very custom applications or dashboards. Again, internally, we have a very rich customer lookup dashboard. We're a customer success team. We care a lot about the health of our customers and what they're doing. And at any time, anyone at Looker can enter in a customer's name at the top of this dashboard, and they'll get everything about that customer. They'll get the Zendesk tickets that they've sent to our support team. They'll get information about their health and the features that they're using and they're not using. They'll get information about whether or not they're above or below their users on their contract, or who just the main point of contacts are. All of this data is coming from many different data sources, Salesforce, again, Marketo, Zendesk. But because we put it into that centralized database and we had a model to kind of tie all the loose pieces together into a single customer, we're able to kind of explore that in its full detail. And then finally, it does provide just a great way to kind of slice and dice and test and iterate on some of the facets or some of the commonalities of your cohorts. And again, I think we'll see a good example of that as Will kind of walks us through the interface. And just to kind of, as a preview of that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the UI, because this is where Will is going to be kind of focusing his talk. And so when you explore in Looker, and when we explore in the context of cohorts, the dimensions of your query, what we see on the left-hand side here, become essentially the different buckets, the different groups of users. So if we have, for example, the first order month or the first order date of a customer, that's their group. And so each group will be represented differently. Or maybe we talk about the lead and we talk about the first converted month or the industry of that lead. Again, those are the cohorts of them. And then in Looker, the UI presents, again, a way to add filters and dynamically change these cohorts. So as you're kind of asking questions maybe about, again, when a user joined and months since they signed up, if you want to know maybe in a particular state. So, cohorting in specific values of your data set, the state that someone comes from. And then we see here in the orange, essentially, those are our measures, those are our KPIs, those are what we're tracking over time and looking for trends and differences in behavior. And then Looker provides, again, a way to kind of put a visual component to that, but still provide for the kind of that flexibility into the data set and exploration at that point. So that's what I wanted to cover, at least as far as kind of what cohorting is, the trends that we're seeing in the industry and how it's going to tie to, again, Avant's evolution as a company. And then finally, how Looker is purpose-built for this type of cohorting. So with all that said, I think you'll hear some of those common themes coming up as Will covers kind of what this really looks like in the wild at Avant.
Thanks, Josh. That was really good. So before I dig into the analytics side of things, no problem, let me talk you guys through what Avant is, who I am, and generally how we work with Looker. So Avant has been around since late 2013, and we are at our core a lender. Right now, our issuance is spread across 3 products: a credit line, hard secured loans, and unsecured loans, with unsecured loans being our bread and butter. They make up the vast majority of our portfolio. To date, we've issued a little over $2 billion in the U.S., Canada, and the U.K., and our average loan size is between 5 to 35 grand, with the average sitting just under 10 grand in size. As for me, I'm currently the head of data quality here, but previously was a member of our business intelligence team. And the BI team here at Avant has a pretty unique role in that they operate sort of as a catch-all for all of the difficult technical and business problems that the company faces. So when Moss reached out to me to do this webinar, I actually had a lot of different segment analysis, cohort analysis examples just sitting in my work queue ready to be plucked out. I try to simplify things as much as possible over the next couple of examples, but feel free to ping us with questions on Q&A, and we'll get back to them at the end and hopefully provide any more in-depth color or knowledge that you guys want. As for how Avant uses Looker, we have been using Looker for almost the entirety of our lifetime as a company, and we've gotten a tremendous amount of value from it on the side of enabling business users to take ownership of their data. It's really helped us bridge the gap between the development and the business side of the office, and we've also gotten a huge amount of value as it's supported our changing data structure and growth of data over the past 2 years. I mean, as you can imagine, it's been pretty drastic growth for us with $2 billion in issuance over the course of 2 years. And we've had to change data sources constantly. And Looker has really handled those transitions absolutely seamlessly. I will say that you have to change some things just as a result of syntactical differences between data sources. Right now, we're hooked up to Oracle, Postgres, Redshift, you name it. As a result of that, structure has to change slightly between each of those distinct data sources, but Looker handles those transitions seamlessly. And their tools and functionality that they have is actually awesome in handling both growth and change of structure. Before I go too far down the rabbit hole of pitching Looker itself, let me dig into the first of my examples, which is marketing acquisition analysis. So despite our recent size, Avant likes to think of itself still as a startup. So we're constantly experimenting with new acquisition channels, new technologies, and right now we employ everything from TV and radio, your traditional channels, to your more modern channels, things like viral or social media marketing. Whenever I do analysis like this, I think it's really important to take a step back and first establish some goals, to establish how we're going to route our way to those goals, and to also establish exactly what our KPIs are for these particular acquisition channels. So for starters, our KPIs. I've only picked 3, but for those of you who do a lot of marketing analytics, I'm sure you're aware there are hundreds out there. For this particular analysis, we're going to work off of, firstly, the acquisition rate, or the conversion rate, rather. So that is the rate at which customers get funded coming in through a particular channel. We're also going to look at the average lifetime value of customers that come in through a particular channel. And lastly, we're going to look at the cost per funded product. So essentially the entire cost you can apply to an acquisition channel divided by the count of funded loans. I'm going to segue right now directly to Looker. Sit tight while this buffers for me, guys. And I know that Josh is going to be doing a run-through of Looker's suite of tools and general Looker functionality after this. So if anybody gets confused or if I go too fast, he'll definitely clear up any confusion you might have at the end. So we're right now looking at basic exploration off of our acquisitions table. This output is actually generated from our data warehouse, which sits on top of Redshift. I think Josh actually mentioned this as one of his examples on using Looker in the new data world. But previously, this data was sitting on our Postgres production database. And like I mentioned before, the transition to using the data warehouse was extremely simple. Almost nothing on the back end of Looker had to change in order for us to do this type of analysis. I'm going to start just by throwing a really basic vanity metric onto my table, and that's the count of customers that we're acquiring. I'm also going to add the channel that they came from, the first of my cohorts along my x-axis. And I'm going to throw the created month of these customers along my y-axis. I added a time series element to this output to control for changes in creative. Avant itself changes creative, changes campaigns at the end of every month. So if you see jumps in count between those month-to-month barriers, then often it'll be a result of creative itself. So the time series element is just a control for that. So I'm going to start by running this output. And you can see that, first of all, Looker generates your visualization alongside your data table on the fly, which I love. And based on our visualization, you can see that we've had pretty static numbers in terms of the count of customers by channel and by month. This is essentially just a vanity metric, a basic starting point. I'm going to start now by throwing my KPIs onto this table. Move the count of acquisitions, and my first KPI is the average lifetime value of these customers. I'll add that to my table and rerun. And
Will, this is coming from your data warehouse currently, right? Is this but this has been manipulated or changed in some way as far as the data we're looking at?
Really good point. Yes, all data has been drastically anonymized and changed up. So if you guys see, if this looks too clean to you, if output looks too obvious, that's because it is. It's very rare that in the wild I'd run into analysis this clean without having to do cleansing myself first. I simplified things as much as possible, made the trends as easily identifiable as possible. So yes, it is definitely manipulated. That said, it still sits on top of our data warehouse alongside all of our actual project data. So
perfect.
It's almost identical. So you can tell for our first KPI that there's really nothing on the acquisition channel side standing out as the most successful. Things change month to month and by channel, and all remain relatively around that $10 mark in terms of average customer lifetime value. So there's no value there on that KPI. Let's switch now to our conversion rate. I'll throw conversion rate onto my table and rerun. And this time around, you can see that there's actually an obvious winner, and that is direct mail, far outpacing the competition. For my last KPI, I'm actually going to generate this one by hand, and that's the cost per funded loan. I already have a predefined metric for this available, but I'm going to show off one of Looker's cool new tools that they just released, and that is calculations. So ordinarily, these measures would have to be predefined in LookML on the back end. But for potentially a business user who's not quite as well versed in LookML and might want to be able to generate a metric for themselves on the fly, they can use Looker's handy calculation feature. And I'm going to do that to generate the cost per funded loan. First, I'm going to start with the total cost added to my table. And I'm also going to add the count of funded loans to my table and run that. You can tell my visualization isn't particularly useful yet. Now, I'm going to add a calculation for the cost per funded loan. Extremely straightforward. Simply going to be the total cost divided by the count of funds. We're going to make that a dollar format. When we take a look at our visualization now, we hide our old measures that we no longer need. Run, you'll see that again, there is one clear winner, and that is direct mail with by far the lowest cost per funded loan. Let me switch back to our slideshow now. So where do we go from here? I would argue that this cohort analysis is not actually complete. I'm not convinced that this successful trend for direct mail is a result of direct mail being the channel itself. I'd be curious to see if it is targeting or demographic related. So I would take this output and continue to cohort it by various other demographic characteristics. Anything from customer location to age to FICO, to try to generate some insight as to why direct mail is exhibiting the success it is. It's possible that I'll also get other value out of that cohort. Maybe I'll see that certain channels are engaging better with customers who are engaging with new products in our pipeline, or a certain channel is tied to customers who we're actually trying to move away from. So it's possible that we could apply that insight, the value we're getting out of direct mail, to these other channels and try to get the same success out of them.
And on that note, I had a question on your data sources.
Yeah.
So is a lot of that data on your users when you kind of want to slice and dice by these other pieces of information? You mentioned FICO, you mentioned demographic information. Is that something that you're collecting in the application process on your site, or do you have like other data sources where you gather some additional metadata on users to be able to kind of infer these decisions?
Yeah, so it comes from a few different places, and I'll actually talk about this a bunch in the upcoming fraud example. But we use customer data that's generated by way of customer input, data that we're able to rip off of the customer once they enter our system, even lots and lots of data that's generated from third-party sources, just purchase data from what's out there. Now, as for our second example, we switch gears slightly to fraud detection. This example is a little bit more investigative. Last time around, we sort of retroactively looked at cohort analysis in order to rate success of acquisition channels. This time around, it's going to be a little more forward-facing. First of all, what is fraud for Avant? Right now, we don't really care about payment fraud. The method that fraudsters generally take to defraud Avant is pre-funding, attempting to use someone else's personal information to get funded to their bank account. As a result of that, we're working almost entirely off of data that we generate during the customer application phase. So like I mentioned just now about the marketing acquisition channel data, we're working off of both data that's inputted by the customer and ripped off the customer, as well as some third-party data. You'd think that just customer application data would not be enough to work off of in order to actually generate any real insights, but you'll see that even with very limited amounts of data, you can actually start to identify some pretty suspicious-looking trends. On the methodology side, this example will firstly change in terms of KPIs. So for marketing acquisition analysis, you've got pretty clear, technically defined KPIs, conversion rate or cost of funded product. For something like fraud identification, your KPI is just going to be high numbers of risky-looking customers. So when you see a segment of the population that has a count significantly higher than what things look like on average, that looks suspicious to us. And when those are identified, we pass them off to a team of suspicious activity report reviewers, and those people are intensely trained in reviewing all the data, all the documents, all of the information we can generate tied to these customers, and figuring out what exactly is fraudulent, clearing false positives, things like that. Another change on the methodology side of things is going to be what our actual KPIs look like on the graph. So instead of being forced to cohort by a time series, this time around, I've actually generated a measure for the historical average, and that's what we're going to use as our comparison. So we've eliminated the need to cohort by a time series just by creating more robust measures on the KPI side. I'm going to switch again back to Looker. Sit tight while I buffer. This example is actually sitting on an entirely different data source. So last time we were working off of our data warehouse, Redshift data. This time around, we're actually going to be working off of production data. It's closer to real time, so for fraud detection, it's absolutely necessary we work off of production data. And it also enables us to do some more interesting things and build more creative measures simply because it's a different data source on Postgres, and Postgres supports correlated subquerying. That said, you can sort of get around the no correlated subquerying issue in Redshift thanks to Looker's suite of tools. We do so using their persisted derived table functionality. But as someone like me who spends a lot of time just writing a lot of raw SQL, it's often nice to build these creative metrics using just complicated query. So just like last time, I'm going to start by throwing the count, and I'm also actually going to add my historical 6-month average daily count to my table. I'm also going to cut output this time to a single day. And just for starters, I'll run that, and you can immediately see that in terms of our historical count, things line up pretty cleanly. I'm going to now tack on my first cohort. In this example and the subsequent one, I'm going to sequentially cohort things, make them more granular by segment. And that will enable us to start seeing outliers at a more granular level. The first cohort I'm going to tack on is bank name. When I run this, you'll see that compared to the historical 6-month daily average on November 1st, things were pretty clean looking. That said, I really hate this visualization format of comparing two counts, so I've already created a percent of historical average measure, which I'm going to tack on to my output and run that. It's more of a distance from the historical average measure than anything else. And you can see that those hover right around 100%. Nothing really jumps out at you off the bat. Well, our next step is to get a little more granular. And this time I'm going to add the last 4 digits tied to routing numbers for these various banks to my output. And when I run this, see that now that my grouping has got a little bit more granular, immediately an outlier jumps out at us. And that's for a specific routing number tied to JP Morgan Chase. Immediately, this screams fraud to us. You can see that if I tack the count back onto my output and rerun, this is tied to 166 customers. So with a little over $8 grand in our average loan size, it's a pretty significant amount of money for us if we were to prevent fraud here. Let me switch to my second example, which is going to be drilling down by way of customer IP details. So just like last time, I'm going to throw my distance from the historical average measure onto my graph. I'm again going to filter to the same day, actually. And I'll run this. You can see pretty close for this specific day to the historical average. I'm going to start by adding the most parent of my 3 IP-related dimensions, and that is the IP organization. These are pretty randomly selected. And you can see that it is, again, really close to the historical average for these organizations. When I drill in a little bit further to where exactly the IP address came from in terms of state, again, nothing jumps out at me on the outlier side of things. But as soon as I go far enough to the city, immediately an outlier stands out to us. And that's for Santa Ana, California. Again, there's a significant count of customers here, I think 180 or so. They're at 180, so a huge amount of fraud could potentially be prevented by monitoring like this. Question now becomes, where do we go from here? Switch back to my slides. So our next steps are firstly going to be to cleanse output and identify false positives. And that's going to happen just by what I mentioned earlier, sending this output off to our suspicious activity report reviewing team. Secondarily, how do we make this output more sustainable? Looker has really beautiful scheduling and automation techniques available to you. So I would immediately start using complex filtering to maybe only return results when I see an outlier within some standard deviations outside the mean, or only return results when I see an outlier 400% of the historical average. And by way of using that in tandem with scheduling, I only get an alert when risky cohorts like this emerge. That said, this still isn't a super sustainable way to go about identifying fraud rings. From here, I would team up with our data science team and start using this output to generate insights as to how we can improve our fraud model, how to improve our hard-coded fraud identification business rules. We're steadily trying to move toward a state that is less tied to hard-coded business rules in a single fraud model and more of an ecosystem of fraud models where we're segmenting customers based on specific demographic characteristics and pushing them into distinct fraud models based on that. So this type of analysis would inform that process very heavily. And honestly, it's exactly what our fraud analysts are doing right now and will continue to be doing in the very near future. That's all I've got. Moss, you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, well, thanks. That was awesome. So I think at this point, we're going to be turning it over to a couple of questions that we have from the audience here. And let me just also advance our slide here. Great. So actually, before we cut over to the questions, let's start with the conclusions. Yes, we talked about a few different things here today. One being cohort analysis, and really what it is, again, grouping subsets of users, or again, whatever it is that you're grouping or learning more about, and observing their behavior over time. The key stipulation being that these users do not change those groups during the life cycle or during the kind of over the time frame of the analysis. We also heard that a lot of new database technologies are emerging that allow for easier capture, movement, and performance of queries and exploration of data sets. Meanwhile, we also see just kind of a huge influx of the data sources and the amount of data that is accessible, trackable, and can be leveraged to learn more about our cohorts, slice them and dice them in more and novel ways. To gain understanding and control of your business, you have to evaluate it using the right metrics, and your data model, it's going to evolve over time, and the metrics you look at are going to evolve and change over time. There might be some that are very, standard and core to your business, revenue, margins. If you're SaaS, you're looking at retention and so forth. But they might be new and novel. They might be for a very particular use case, like we saw with Venmo and their chargeback metric. But the key thing is to test and iterate on this model, just like it were a product too. And then finally, create KPIs that address the goal of the organization as a whole and the individual team and the individuals and teams within it. So kind of to that previous point, what is the business most interested in at a high level? And what is that KPI? What are those couple of KPIs that matter the most? But then individually amongst teams or amongst different projects, what are individual KPIs that are important to track to, again, achieve some business outcome? And with that said, now we will turn it over to Q&A from the audience, and questions that we have from the audience.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. That was fantastic. We have had a few questions come in. The first question is, can we build a cumulative cohort? If yes, how? Moss, you want to take it away on this one?
Yes, so I think I might need a little bit further clarification. So when we're saying cumulative cohort, this is coming from Vivek, I believe. What do you mean by that? What are we summing up over time? Are we kind of adding users to these cohorts? I'll wait to see if we get a response in the Q&A window. Unless Will, if that's a familiar concept.
I mean, I will mention that running totals are really easily built in Looker thanks to the actual functionality of LookML. And we do cumulative comparisons compared to actual standard metrics all the time just because of that functionality. But yeah, that's about it.
Okay, I see. Yeah. So if we're talking about kind of starting with a cohort, maybe if we're looking at, first order month, for example, and we want to know cumulatively the total revenue contributed or the total profit contributed from that population, that cohort over time, absolutely. That would take the form of more or less like a stacked area chart. We'd be looking again at each cohort and seeing that band either expand or contract over time. And so absolutely. In fact, when we maybe go into the Looker demo, I can give you an example of what that looks like on the fly.
Yeah, I remember being forced to build out custom subqueries. This was way back when we first implemented Looker in order to handle running totals. But like immediately after we ran into that issue, they rolled out a feature to enable to do those on the fly, canned into the LookML structure. We've actually seen that happen a lot with our relationship with Looker, where we'll run into something we want to see and they'll actually roll it out almost right away when we ask for a new feature. So it's been pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's been great working with companies like Avant and kind of helping them help us kind of drive this product roadmap and drive the idea of Looker. We know we want to be one of the best, most flexible business intelligence exploration platforms on the market, but it's our customers that kind of help guide us into what they're trying to achieve and what they want to do. So that feedback and what they're looking to do from a product functionality standpoint is definitely something that we're kind of evolving on and iterating on pretty rapidly. Actually, we have about a 4-week release cycle.
Yeah, so Vivek clarified she's looking to sum revenue over time by customer registration date and cumulative revenue on a month-by-month scale, and that is absolutely doable. Mosk, hopefully you can show some running totals in your demo after this.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly how I interpreted it. So I can definitely take a look at putting something like that together, or at least kind of showing you what that final output would look like. But that's exactly in our wheelhouse. In fact, I didn't really touch on it too much, but Looker actually provides what we call LookML blocks, which are snippets of LookML code that contain essentially the framework that allow for some of the analysis that we're talking about in the webinar today. And we actually have a specific block just built for user cohorts and done in such a way that you can look at this cumulative spend and revenue over time broken out by month over month or however you'd like to view that granularity.
We'll move on
Perfect.
to the next one.
Seems like we got that question answered very thoroughly. So the next question is, why can't we just do analysis like this via manual querying or traditional analytical tools like Excel? Will, you want to take that one away for us?
Sure. And this actually comes back to a lot of things that Josh mentioned in his early slides about reusability and sustainability. You're right. We can absolutely run manual queries by hand and rip output out and dump it in Excel and do this analysis there. But we've just found a tremendous amount of value in the reusability of building these structures into Looker and also sustainability in that we're able to tie alerting and monitoring and automated emailing to it. And at the same time, it's also lent better ownership of complex analysis like this to our business users, because all of a sudden they're able to dig into the data and do it themselves just using the Looker interface, whereas before a lot of them would be forced to learn SQL and learn general database infrastructure and just didn't quite have the knowledge for it.
Yeah, we talk a lot about kind of like data bread lines and people having to wait to get serviced for the new pull or the additional slice or the additional filter in which they wanted to look at this data set, but they want to continue to ask questions of it. And that's kind of what we're going after, with Looker is you want to build a platform that people can engage with and ask and answer questions of the data set while ensuring that they're getting accurate results back. So with Looker, it means defining your cohorts, one time in one SQL query in the data model itself, and then using that as either the denominator or the numerator of the equation, if you break it down that way, and giving that to everyone so that they then have an interface where they can take these cohorts and that they're operating on what the business defines as revenue, or what the business defines as margins or profit, or a successful application, or a chargeback rate. You know that they're looking at the right stuff, the right metrics, but you're giving them the platform to kind of slice and dice and iterate on that and evolve it over time.
Perfect. Alrighty, up next we have cohort analysis tends to focus on user behaviors, but can you cite any other areas that present us with low-hanging fruit for analytics when companies are just getting started? Everybody loves low-hanging fruit, Moss. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, I happen to love fruit too. So I've gone picking in the past. So yes, so we work with a lot of different companies of different sizes. We're talking enterprise companies, some of the largest technology companies in the world today, as well as companies that are just getting started. And kind of the common denominator amongst all these companies is they have some data. They have, something that they're tracking. They've brought data to us. They have a database. But, what they're trying to do might differ, and it typically differs based on the size of that company. So cohort analysis becomes relevant when you have enough data to slice and dice, when you have enough activity to get to some level of statistical significance, or at least directionally there. But for teams that are just getting started, I think what I've seen really Looker provide is twofold. One is a answer to what the heck is happening, if anything. So just basic things like, did anyone sign up today? Did anyone spend anything on the site today? Again, depending on if it's transactional, the data set, or if it's static, that might differ, but really just what's going on in the data, not related to cohorting, but just what's happening. We see these take the form of kind of what we've seen as like business pulse dashboards. Looker provides ways to schedule and download and automate certain what we call looks. These are queries, but you can get alerted to the fact that maybe someone came to the site from some source or some destination, again, whatever that data is. But Looker can kind of be the lens into what is happening, if it's not cohorting, just what is going on. And then I've also seen a lot of customers create very purpose-built dashboards that help individuals in the company satisfy some workflow or some operational aspect of the business. So if it's someone in a call center or support capacity, they're looking at the tickets that have come in and answering them or responding to them, or looking up the customers. Maybe it's like a customer lookup dashboard, as I mentioned earlier, with what we use here at Looker. We also have companies that have a database of job candidates and developers for different roles, and they can actually slice and dice and filter and get a kind of a filtered list of people that satisfy some condition, and then go take action on that. Maybe they download it as a CSV, maybe they put it into some mailer or some automated email campaign. But again, allowing them to kind of self-serve a data extract that they need, given the parameters that they want to filter upon. So Looker makes it fairly simple to kind of see what's going on, or build custom fit data applications essentially that allow you to kind of satisfy some workflow very specific to your business. So again, outside of cohort analysis, very practical kind of operational based use cases for Looker whenever you have a data set.
Well, do you want to weigh in on that one at all?
I will mention that when we were first starting out, I felt like I was cohorting everything I possibly could just to generate whatever insight I could. And a lot of that was directed at customer insights. So just cutting products based on value to the company, really, by various demographics, generate as many customer insights as possible. But we were actually using tons and tons of different KPIs, and a lot of them are pretty relevant only to lending. But that sort of methodology of cohorting everything you possibly can is something that I've seen analysts do all over the place. Literally take whatever data characteristics they can and start cutting up data on it to identify patterns and trends.
Great. All right, so I think we have time for just one more question. Moss, I'm going to shoot this one over to you. So the question is it possible to implement statistical algorithms in LookML? Take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Elena. So yeah, this comes up a lot, and it obviously comes up because we mentioned the data science application earlier in the webinar on even just cohorting itself, comparing apples to apples, and hopefully applying some level of statistical significance to that. Looker itself, the LookML tool LookML, the language is SQL abstraction. So whatever you're capable of defining and capturing in a SQL statement, you can then define and capture in LookML. Typically, the more advanced data science applications have to come from either utilization of our on-the-fly calculations. I don't know if you saw that with Will's portion of the demo of his cohorting analysis, but essentially you can create some function of the data set that you're working on the fly. That is, again, for more basic, we've seen people do like linear regression and so forth and table calcs. But otherwise, we see a lot of people either going the route of, again, extracting the data out of Looker into some other system or using our APIs. We actually have R SDK in beta, I believe, that you can use to ingest into R for statistical analysis. So a few different options, but all coming down to the fact that Looker makes it very simple once you have this model and this data set to get it into other systems that you want to use it in.
Perfect. All right. I think that is all the time we have for questions. Just to leave Josh you 5 minutes to do a quick demo. Just before that, I will remind you that this webinar will be posted on looker.com tomorrow. And I will also send out an email with the recording and also with a slide deck. If you don't have time to stay for the demo, you can get a demo of Looker at looker.com/demo, or if you can, stay for the next 5 minutes, and Josh is going to give us a little look-see of Looker.
That's right. So I'm just going to get my screen set up real quick. I've got about 5 minutes. That's about the amount of time that you get on a convention room floor. So I will kind of give you the very, very quick abridged version of the Looker demo. And because we've kind of talked about these concepts, some things will look or sound familiar as I go through that. But let me just start with this screen share. I'm going to look around the room over here, make sure that everyone's seeing it okay. And it looks like it's popped up. Awesome. So I kind of mentioned, again, these key points of Looker, one being completely web-based. So I'm just logged in here at our demo environment. And what we're looking at is a Looker dashboard. Looker dashboards typically are kind of a way in which a business user comes into the platform and they engage with curated content. So analysts or other users in the system might have built this dashboard or individual queries on this dashboard. And it's an interactive experience for them to explore that data set. Now, in this particular case, we're connected to a backend database. The data has been modeled. We've found the relationships between all the different tables. We've created our concept of our cohorts and any additional ways that we want to slice and dice the data. And now we're looking at, in this case, a web analytics overview of our website. So how visitors are interacting with the site and changes day over day. We're looking at location-based visitors. We actually just released a new version of our map system that allows for like zooming and panning, so almost the equivalent of working with like a Google Maps, but in Looker and again, live on your data set. These dashboards are usually built in an interactive manner. So anything can be really like clicked upon or explored further. So if we click on like legends, that will hide or remove a legend. We're looking here at an e-commerce funnel. So looking at our drop-offs and the behavior of our users over time. For anyone that's interested in making changes to these dashboards, they can be shipped with global filters. So in this case, maybe we want to look at users from a given country, the United States, for example, and maybe we only are interested in users that are coming from the Chrome browser. Maybe I'm on the Chrome design team and I want to look at our metrics specific to Chrome. And I click my run button, and what we'll see here is actually all of the elements on the dashboard update for us. Again, that's data coming from the database itself. And we'll be able to look at that. Here we have maybe a little bit of delay, so I'm going to let this load so people can see that working well. Looker is completely web-based too, so we can actually create connections between these dashboards via URLs. And a good example of that here is at the bottom here. So we have top brands by page views, unique sessions, and duration. Now we're looking at the number of events, how many unique visitors have taken a look at these brands, and their average session duration. But maybe I'm interested in also taking a look at a particular brand in further detail. So I click onto my Spark line here, and what we do is we actually load a new dashboard, all with self-contained within the application, but filter on the Calvin Klein brand. And now we have a rich set of data. What I love about this data set too is that it combines both transactional data, so what people are actually interacting with on the website, whether it's ordering or again, viewing a particular item and adding it to their cart, as well as kind of just the event data. So we see a lot of companies either building their own event tracking systems or using systems like Snowplow or Google Analytics to look at what the user is doing on the website. And what this demo and this data set does is actually combines the two. So we can look at the website sessions by the transactional lifetime value of each user based on how many times they purchased, if they have one lifetime purchase or if they've never purchased, and just kind of looking at how those users are engaging with the brand. Or maybe we want to break it out by the brand traffic for Calvin Klein and see where the sources of the traffic are coming on based on the person's iOS machine. Looker has a concept of drilling too that I'll touch on very briefly, but all of these dashboards allow a level of further exploration by clicking in or drilling into the data set. So for example, we see the top visitors and transaction history for Calvin Klein in the past 90 days. We see the user's name. I can click into all of their orders or all the items that they've ever purchased to see a list of everything they purchased from us. I can see where they're from. I can see what their original source was. And I can even drill into this number 4 here. This number 4 represents the 4 sessions that they've had with us in the past 90 days. When I click on that number 4, we're taken into the Explore section. This is where Will was doing a lot of his demonstration. And in this case, we're actually going to break out those 4 sessions into the individual line items. So that row level of detail that I saw before, we call that a drill path. So we can see the sequence of the session by the user, when it started, the farthest step they got into the funnel. We can add any other dimension, these dimensions that exist in our database or derived in LookML to the query, or we can even go a step further and maybe look at the 2 events that were fired in this particular session by clicking on the number 2, seeing when the request time came in and the full page URL for those two events. So at checkout and product 813. So that is the concept of kind of drilling and exploring in Looker. And the Explore interface. Queries themselves, they can be visualized, which we had seen, again, by clicking onto a visualization tab. So if I just quickly maybe update this query here, just to kind of give you a very simple example, this will visualize on the screen. And then our queries can also be, let me just fix this for a second. I might have the wrong dimension in this case, but if we go back to our dashboard, we can drill into each one of these visualizations themselves and kind of take a look at how you can change or customize the visualization. So by clicking into the title and then the visualization tab itself, we see our visualizations, and they can take a variety of different forms depending on what you're looking at and what you want to visually create. And once you're done with that, it's then very simple to kind of work with your data set and Looker. So we allow you to save these queries, these act as essentially as bookmarks to both the visualization and the state of the Explore page. We can also work with the URLs themselves too. So if we copied this and maybe I sent it over to Will via Slack or via an email, they click in, they see exactly what I have on my screen. We also have a share button. So if you want a shortened version of that URL, we can do that as well. With that, you also have the ability to download. We talked about scheduling. You can make these looks public, these queries public, so you can create endpoints that have basically streaming data sets, JSON, text, CSV. And we saw the dashboarding system, so we can add these to dashboards as well. And finally, just kind of to talk a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes here. As the users are interacting with and manipulating their queries or adding filters or other dimensions, Looker behind the scenes, based on your data model, is putting together the appropriate SQL statement. So when you start to see kind of the exploration that can be done in the tool, the adding and removing of filters and dimensions and measures, these SQL statements can get pretty complex. You probably wouldn't want to write these all by hand. You definitely wouldn't want to do it, many, many times over, maybe one time. But again, Looker kind of abstracts it away and makes that fairly simple for you to work with. And then the modeling layer itself, I just want to briefly touch on the concept of the modeling layer. Again, this is more maintained by the analysts on your team or those that understand SQL and database technology or database architecture. The model file itself contains essentially kind of the framework of the data. It looks for the relationships between your tables, and you define how to join essentially. So with a model file and what we call an explorer, you create basically an exploration area that users can explore everything about their order items and also see information from orders, products, users orders facts, which isn't even a table in the database. It's actually a derived table in LookML. And then finally, also just talking about our user cohorts. Looking at our user cohorts that we talked about today. So this is actually how we put those together. So it's by defining each user and associating them with their cohort. In this case, it's the month in which they had a transaction or they joined. And so once this view is defined, or this derived table is defined in LookML, we can then use that throughout the model. We can use these different dimensions, just as we used other dimensions in our analysis, as well as we talked about cumulative spend and cumulative sum of revenue. That's what those look like here. And so those measures and those transaction values can be summed up and then used in further exploration of the data set. So I know we're about 5 minutes over, and it was kind of a brief, kind of a little bit, touches on a few of the different concepts of Looker and LookML. But if there's any further questions or follow-up, we'll have the slides and so forth for everyone to take a look at.